Unsealed Archives, New York, 1976. You carry a photograph in your head of the last big one, the 200th, even if you were born too late to stand in it. Tall ships coming up the rivers, bunting on every rail, fireworks over a capital that still looked like it believed in itself. You look at that picture the way a man looks at a photograph of his father, young and easy, and something in your chest pulls tight because you are sure you are looking at the country you missed, the summit, the thing they had and we let slip. The photograph is not lying about what it shows. It is lying about what it leaves out. The people standing inside it felt worse than you feel right now. They had just lost a war, the first one the country ever lost outright, and watched the last men lifted off a rooftop by helicopter on the evening news. They had just watched the strongest president in 2 generations driven out of office, taken down by the same machine that comes for every strong man, and finished off by a press that called the kill journalism. And they were told, the way you have been told your whole life, that this was justice being done. The lines for gasoline ran around the block. The money was worth less every month they held it. The films that won that year were about rot and surveillance in a city gone feral. People said out loud that they were afraid to wave the flag. They had a sneer ready for the whole celebration, and they used it. The summit you are mourning was to the people who actually stood on it, the floor of the worst decade most of them had ever lived through. And then the strangest thing in the entire record happened. And it is the thing this book is about. The Spirit came. It did not come down out of good times because there were no good times. Nothing on the ground had turned. The war was still lost, and the strong man was still gone. The money was still bleeding out. And in the space of one summer, the mood of the whole country made the steepest climb upward that the people whose job is to measure such things had ever recorded before or since. No one scheduled it. No one could account for it. Ordinary people who had spent a decade being told their country was a crime found themselves, against their own better judgment, moved. The nation, for one season, remembered what it was underneath the worst years it had ever counted. The flatness you feel this year, halfway through the number, the bunting already up and the winning spirit not arrived, the quiet certainty that the occasion is being missed even while it happens, is the exact feeling of the spring before that summer. You are not standing further down the slope than they were. You are standing on the same point of the same curve 50 years on, in the hour that always comes right before the thing no one schedules. The Spirit is not inherited, and it is not owed, and it has never once arrived because the conditions had finally earned it. It comes up late from the floor, chosen by ordinary people, one at a time, in the worst hour. That is how it came up out of 1976. It is the only way it has ever come. And the floor it comes up through is the one you are standing on right now. Here is the part you were never handed. The part this whole book exists to put in your hands. What the founders reached for did not originate here. They knew it. They said so in the words they chose and the marble they cut, and they signed it into papers we will reach in their own hands. They were copying, reaching back or reaching up, for a design of how free people hold themselves that is older than this republic, older than the first city dug out of the ground, older than anything you were taught to call the beginning. I'm not going to tell you where it comes from. Name a thing and you file it. And filing is how a person avoids what they cannot bear to feel. So I will show you the design instead, until you recognize it yourself, and you will, because it was already in you. It is the one thing the apparatus was built to reach, and the one thing it has never once been able to touch. Men dig their whole lives and quit 3 feet from the vein in the dark, certain there was never any gold on the night before the strike. You are not at the start of the digging. You are in the hardest stretch, where the ground gives nothing back. The dark stretch is the ground right before the gold. In January of 1777, a woman named Mary Catherine Goddard ran a printing press in Baltimore. The Continental Congress handed her the Declaration of Independence and asked her to print it as a broadside, every signer's name on it, so the document could travel into the colonies and the men who signed it could not pretend they had not. She did the work. Then she did something none of the other printers had done. She added her own name at the bottom. Printed by Mary Catherine Goddard, Baltimore. She knew what the document could cost her. If the rebellion failed, every name on that page was a hanging name, including hers. She put it on. The Goddard broadside is the first printed edition of the Declaration with the full signatories. It is also the first state document in American history with a woman's name on it. The story most of us were told about this country is that the post-war century was the American summit, and that what we live through now is the slow erosion of a once great civilization. The story is upside down. The post-war century was the empty interlude between 2 iterations of the actual country. What is rising now is the country returning to its own face. For 60 years, the buildings told the truth. They were made by people who believed in nothing, and they looked like it. Columns are sky-pointing. Pediments are theological. Classical proportions are mathematical reflections of a cosmos believed to be ordered by an author. Drain the theology, and the form becomes either dead imitation or honest brutalism. The country for 60 years was honest. This was an experiment built on covenant rather than conquest. The Romans named the gods of their household, then the gods of the state, then the emperor's god, and on the day they did the last thing, they were no longer Rome. The founders did the opposite. They named the father in the Northwest Ordinance. They named him in the second sentence of the Declaration. They wrote the religion clauses of the First Amendment to keep the space open for the relationship. They were building a republic that would refuse to become an empire. And they understood that a republic without affection would not survive 2 centuries. Washington studied Palladio. Jefferson designed the University of Virginia himself, every column proportion, every brick pattern. They built a capital on the model of Athens and Rome because they were attempting something untested in the modern world. A republic that would last had to be loved, and a citizen does not love what is ugly. Monarchies could afford ugliness because monarchies were obeyed. Empires could afford ugliness because empires were feared. A republic had to inspire affection in the citizens who lived inside it, or the citizens would eventually wander away. The central religious building of the United States is the National Mall. Most Americans have never noticed because the mall has no roof. The Lincoln Memorial is a Greek temple, and Lincoln sits inside it the way Zeus once sat at Olympia. The Jefferson Memorial is a pantheon. The Washington Monument is an obelisk pointing at the sky the founders believed authored the cosmos. The reflecting pool is a long stripe of baptismal water aligned to the axis. The architects who composed the mall under the 1901 Macmillan Plan, Olmsted and Burnham and McKim and St. Gaudens, were not designing monuments. They were composing a basilica without a ceiling. The mall was not laid out for any single generation that would walk it. It was laid out for the citizens who would walk it in 1950 and 2050 and 2150 and 2250. The Macmillan team operated on a horizon their own lives would not see. They believed the Republic would still be standing in 2 to 3 centuries, and they believed it had to be standing under a sky their grandchildren could read. You can see the reversion in the fountain starting up again on federal plazas where they had stood dry for 30 years. You can see it in the classical orders returning to the civic register. You can see it in an arch rising across the river from the Lincoln Memorial, 1 foot of height for every year of the Republic, topped not by liberty, but by a figure closer to Roman victory. The words, "One nation under God," set in gold, letters tall enough to read from a quarter mile. The words are not new. Lincoln stood at Gettysburg with the country dying and gave it back to itself as a nation under God, owed a new birth of freedom. A nation surrounded by ugliness becomes worse at being itself. A nation surrounded by beauty becomes better at it. A republic that builds its courthouses out of parking structure concrete teaches its citizens that justice has no proportion. A republic that builds its arches with Roman victory and gold letters teaches them that the things they live among are worth defending. Underneath the architecture, a quieter and slower change is happening in millions of houses on millions of mornings. One pattern reassembling, slow and underground, in 1,000 places that have never heard of each other. The founders' own words. A government once wrote down in plain words what the country was for. 45 pages. 2 days later, it pulled the page off its own servers, and the people who pulled it called it propaganda. And you can find it again now. But a document that says only what the founders already said in their own hands, and still gets pulled down as a thing too dangerous to leave standing, has touched something live. Under the fight it got dragged into, the document is this: an account of where authority comes from. The same account whether you read it in 1776 or 1937 or now, which is the whole reason it could not be left up. At its center sit the founders' own words, the second sentence of the Declaration. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it. The word that does the work there is creator. The rights predate the government. The government is built afterward for one job: to guard them. The report says it without flinching. These rights are found in nature and are not created by man or government. Men create governments to secure natural rights. The very purpose of government is to secure these rights. The men who built it did not think this could run as a secular machine. In proclaiming the self-evident truths of the Declaration, the founders interwove reason and revelation into America's creed. One such truth is that there are fixed laws higher than those enacted by governments. They had little doubt that faith was essential to the new experiment in self-government. The facts of our founding are not partisan. They address the concerns of all Americans, every class, race, religion, and region. The men who signed it agreed on almost nothing about God. Deists and Calvinists, Quakers and Masons, a man who took a razor to the Gospels, and men who prayed on their knees in the snow. They disagreed violently about the source. They agreed completely on the floor. The rights are in the person before any government shows up, and nobody has ever had to settle his theological bills to stand on them. The design never asked anyone for a confession. It asked for consent. The Baptist and the atheist stand on the same floor, and the floor holds both. And that was the point. That is the design set down by the men who built it. It should hold itself up. It does not. You know the voice. It comes on the morning the numbers do not work. It is quiet, and it is reasonable, and it does not sound like evil. It sounds like arithmetic. There is not going to be enough, it says. Someone in this is going to go without, and it had better not be you and yours. Hold tighter. Take first. Get yours before the getting is gone. You have heard that voice your whole life. At the kitchen table, with the bills out, in the parking lot of a job that just let people go, in the back of your mind every time the word recession crossed the screen. You did not invent it. It was running in you before you could name it, and it has been running in every person who ever lived. And it is the oldest lie on this planet. The lie is one sentence. There is not enough, so someone has to lose. Almost everything cruel that people have ever done to each other comes down out of that one sentence, and almost none of it required anyone to be cruel. Once you believe the supply is fixed and short, every kindness becomes a risk, every stranger becomes a competitor, and every act of taking becomes a kind of self-defense. The math does the cruelty on its own. You do not need villains. You need only a room full of people who have all quietly agreed there is not going to be enough. And once a people believes that, it builds an altar. You already half know the shape of the thing because it is buried in the oldest stories every culture kept. The shining city that runs on something kept suffering in a room beneath it. The god on the mountain who has to be fed on a schedule, or the crops fail and the sun does not come back. Someone underneath so the rest can stand on top. It was never questioned because it never had to be. It felt like the weather. It only feels like the way things are. It is a wound, and the wound has a beginning. Follow the hunger back. Not a few years, not a few centuries. All the way back, past the oldest ruins anyone has ever dug up, to the place where the lie does not appear in the record yet, and then all at once it does. Something happened there. A choice got made on this world, once early by someone who had the standing to make it. The choice was to go it alone, to stop trusting the hand that had been feeding everything, and to take instead, to be his own source. It looked at the time like independence. It was a cut. The line that had carried enough into this world was severed at that one act, and a place that had always run on plenty woke up the next morning running on the fear of running out. And it has been running on it ever since. The scarcity you feel in your chest on the bad mornings is the draft still coming through a door that was opened a very long time ago and never quite shut. You can feel the shape of it without the name, the way you feel a cold spot in a house and no window is cracked somewhere before you ever find it. Here's the part the loud voices work hardest to keep you from seeing. In every fight that matters, there are 3 positions, and the 2 that shout the loudest are always secretly on the same side. The first voice says, the suffering is simply how reality is built. Nature read in tooth and claw, entropy. The strong eat the weak. The gods are hungry. That is the floor of the cosmos, so stop crying and go get yours. The second voice is gentler, and you probably first met it in a building with a steeple. It says the suffering is holy. The debt is real. The books must balance. Someone has to bleed to settle them, and the good news, it tells you, is that the bill was finally paid on your behalf, so be grateful. Those 2 voices believe they are at war. They agree on everything that counts. Both are certain the hunger is real and the price is blood. They only argue about who gets billed. The third position is the one nobody is selling because there is no power to be had in it. It is this. The hunger was never real. The debt was never real. The books were forged. And you have stood in that third position yourself for a moment, probably without noticing it happen. The time someone forgave you a thing you were certain you would have to pay for and simply did not collect it. And you could not make sense of it because you were still doing the math and they had already stopped. The time the money or the help or the way through arrived from a direction you were not even watching. When every number on the page swore there would not be enough, and there was, you called those flukes and moved on. They were not flukes. They were the old baseline bleeding through the lie. A few seconds of a world that runs on enough, showing you what it looks like under the one that runs on fear. None of this stays private. The lie does not only live in your chest on the bad mornings. It is the operating code of every government that has ever held power on this world. The altar becomes the throne. The blood becomes the tax that funds the machine that collects the tax. The basement gets filled quietly and on a schedule with whoever the system has decided is the acceptable price of everyone else's comfort. And the faces down there change every generation, while the arrangement never does. You can write a founding document that refuses the altar in plain language and still find, a few generations on, that the altar has been rebuilt in the cellar where no one looks, because the code is patient and it does not need a crown. That is the disease, scarcity, and the altar it always builds to feed itself, and under them both the one lie the whole machine rests on, that a person is a thing that can be spent. So here it is, not the country. The thing the country is a copy of. I have been promising you a design for a whole book and asking you to take it on faith that it is older than the Republic that cut its columns to look ancient. Here is where I stop pointing at it and lay it on the table. The pattern under the parchment. You will not need me to argue that it is good. You will feel that it is good, the way you feel a true note. The only thing I have to do is show you the parts in the right order, and the order matters, because each one falls out of the one before it, the way a building falls out of its first stone. Start with the smallest part, because the smallest part is the whole secret. Every way of governing people has to decide, before it decides anything else, what the smallest real thing is. The unit that cannot be divided any further and still mean something. Get that one answer wrong and everything stacked on top comes out wrong. The old engine answers the mass, the tribe, the class, the nation, the order, the party, something plural, something you are a piece of. And a piece can be spent. Once the real unit is the group. A single life is a rounding error, and every altar that was ever raised came down from that one quiet decision about what counts. The design answers with the person. One person. Not the crowd he is standing in, not the people he came from, not the side he is sorted onto. The person, whole, the smallest sovereign there is, with nothing underneath him to appeal past. Everything else, every council and office and border, gets built up out of persons the way a wall gets built up out of stones. And it answers to them, and it holds exactly as much right as they have lent it, and not 1 degree more. You have been standing inside one of these your whole life without a name for it. By the end, you will know which. Which way the power runs is the entire thing. In the old engine, authority comes down. It starts at the top, a throne, a chair, a body that has decided it speaks for the whole, and it falls from there onto the people below like weather. They receive it. They do not issue it. They are governed the way a field is rained on, and because the water falls from above, the only questions a person is ever allowed are who sits at the top and how hard it comes down. Never whether the sky should have been handed the water at all. The design turns the arrow around. Authority runs up. It begins in the person, who holds all of it to start with. The way a man holds his own hands. He lends a little of it upward by consent, to do the few things one person cannot do alone, and what he lends he can call back. Nothing at the top owns any power except what was passed up to it from below, on loan, revocable. The moment a thing at the top forgets that and acts as though the power began in itself, it has stopped being the design and become the very thing the design was drawn to prevent. Not a kinder king. No king. The arrow pointing up instead of down, and a person at the bottom who turns out to be the top. Which means there is nowhere permanent to stand above another person. The old engine always grows such a place. A class that does not rotate, a bloodline, an order, a credentialed priesthood, a party that cannot be voted out. Some set of people who take up the doorway between you and whatever you were reaching for, and charge a toll on the passage. They will tell you the toll is for your protection. The toll is the point. The design leaves the doorway empty. Service inside it is real and heavy and temporary. A weight a person picks up and sets back down. Never a thing he gets to become. The seat is always returned. And on the deepest matter, the one a person settles alone in the dark, the design raises walls on purpose to keep every office and every altar out of the path, so that nothing official ever gets to stand between a person and the source of him. That ground is left clear, unbrokered, sovereign. The men who built the local copy cut exactly that into stone and did not entirely grasp that they were transcribing a far older instruction. That on the one thing that matters most, no one mediates, and the line runs direct, or it does not run. And because the design assumes the worst about power, it never lets power gather in one place. People mistake this part for dull machinery, the gears and the chambers and the division of offices, and it is actually the design distrusting itself on purpose. It knows what power does. It knows that power left in a single pair of hands closes the way a hand closes. That this is not a defect in wicked men, but the behavior of the thing in all men. And so it splits itself down the middle and sets its own halves to watch each other. It hands the same hard question to many small rooms instead of one great one, and lets them try many answers at once. So a mistake stays local, and a cure can be copied. Each piece guards the others. No piece is trusted alone. A person hears all that structure and thinks it is the boring part. It is the love. It is a design that cared about the person enough to refuse to trust even itself with him. The old way moves people by force. Push, threat, hunger, the closed fist. Does not even need them to believe it. It needs them to obey, and obedience scales. You can compel a great many people who do not believe one word of it, which is exactly why the old way is so quick to build and so quick to rot. Force is cheap, and it buys nothing that lasts. The one thing it can never manufacture is a single person who means it. The design runs on the opposite current. It moves a person by drawing the best thing already in him up into the open, by teaching him, by trusting him, by leaving him free enough to wreck himself and betting that most will not. It runs on the open hand. Its fuel is voluntary, the aligned will of someone who was not made to and chose to, and that fuel is rare and slow and almost impossible to counterfeit. And it is the only kind that has ever built a thing that stood. The design is harder to raise than any empire and harder to pull down for one reason. What it runs on does not live in the building. It lives in the person, and the person carries it out the door with him every night, which brings us at last to the one thing. I told you the design runs on something the altar exists to deny. This is it. The altar runs on the person being expendable, a means, fuel, a figure that can be subtracted for the good of the larger thing. The design runs on the reverse, on the person being the end himself, carrying something set in him before he drew breath that no power above him put there, and so no power above him can reach in and take back. A worth that was never issued, a floor that no boot finds the bottom of. Every wall the design raises, every arrow it turns upward, every seat it keeps temporary, every power it cuts in half, stands there for one reason, to keep the machine off that single square of ground. You already know whether the square's there. You have stood on it. You stood on it the last time everything was stripped from you, and there was still something they did not get. That is not a figure of speech. That is the floor, and the design is only the architecture. A few men once built around it, roughly on purpose. The best copy they could cut of a thing they could feel through their hands and could not name. because they did not invent it. A design this clean does not get drawn for the first time by tired men in a hot room over single summer. It is too whole. It answers questions they had not yet learned to ask. It rests on things about a person that no one in that room could have proven, and that every one of them already knew. They were not its authors. They were copyists, working from a pattern older than the Republic whose marble they imitated, older than the first city anyone has yet dug out of the ground, older than anything you were ever taught to call the beginning. They reached back for it, or they reached up for it, and they got a piece of it down onto paper, and the piece they got down is the most of it that has ever reached paper in one place on this small and badly cut off world. The shape is this. What was built here is a first draft, a local attempt on one quarantined world at a way for free persons to hold themselves together that already exists somewhere in its finished form and runs and has been running and was the model open on the table the whole time. The country is a sketch of the thing. The thing itself is older and elsewhere and was real before the sketch. Read the document again with that in your hands and it moves under you. The founder's own words. The equality they called self-evident. The rights a government can only guard, never author. The creator set at the root of all of it. That is the sound of a man transcribing, taking down, as faithfully as the language would allow, a design he was certain of and could not source, and signing at the bottom the one footnote he had no doubt about, that none of this begins with us. The copy is not only on the parchment. A man has a truck that will not start. His neighbor has a set of wrenches and a Saturday. Nobody calls anybody. The hood is up, and the man is standing there with his hands on his hips. And that is the shape of a man who needs a second pair of hands. And the neighbor crosses the grass because he read it off the driveway like weather. They have never once voted the same way. They work on the truck for 3 hours. A kid brings out lemonade with both hands. Another kid holds the flashlight and holds it wrong, and nobody corrects her twice. When the engine finally catches, the neighbor does not say, "You're welcome." He says, "Good truck." The owner does not say, "Thank you." He says, "Good wrenches." And the instant a thing like that is set into the world, the old engine turns toward it. It has no choice. A design built to keep the machine off the person is the only real threat the machine has ever met. And it has been working to revert this one since the first night it was installed, patiently, in every language the centuries have put in its mouth, which leaves the only question that was ever live. Not whether the design is good. You can feel that it is good. Whether it held. Whether the copy cut here, on this world, outlasted the thing that came for it the moment the ink was dry. The loud fights about the country are the wrong fights. Whether it can still be saved. Whether it was ever worth saving. All of it is noise laid over the one question that decides the next 1,000 years. And that question is older than any of the names shouting it. Every nation that ever ran the world ran out of road at about the same mileage. A British general named Glubb spent his career in the field and his old age in the records, and he found the same number under every empire he checked. The Assyrians, Rome, the Arabs, the Spanish. The British he had served himself. 10 generations, about 250 years. Then the same ending every time, whatever the language or the gods or the weapons. They rise on courage. They grow rich. They grow comfortable. The great-grandchildren of the men who bled for the thing come up soft and clever and certain it holds itself up, and it does not. Glubb had a name for the last stage, the pioneer worn down into a dependent of the state. That is where the road always ends. He counted 3,000 years of it, and the number never moved. The country is 250 years old, old enough by the only clock that has ever kept this kind of time to die on schedule. The men who built it understood the clock. They had studied every one of those dead empires on purpose, and they built the one machine engineered to break the cycle that kills kingdoms. You have just seen the design it was cut from. Power split, so no hand could close around it. Authority running up from the people instead of down from a throne. A thing made to refuse the ending that comes for everything. They built fail-safes behind the fail-safes. Power that turned over, so no hand could keep it. An executive the people could vote out. A legislature they could replace. And behind those, one room built not to turn over at all, made unelected and unreachable on purpose. So there would always be a last place to hold the line after every other place had folded. A free people can survive a corrupt president. The office turns over. It can survive a corrupt Congress. The seats turn over. The one thing it cannot survive is the capture of that last room, because that room was the point of the whole design. The door built to stay shut when all the others blew open, and the force that turns a free people back into a managed one came for it the same night. Before the signatures were dry, the paperwork to undo them had already started. There is an administration older than any government, and it has one move, run in every century, on every people who ever got loose. It does not conquer you. It waits, and it manages, and it makes the cage comfortable enough that you walk into it on your own. People have 100 names for it. The system, the machine, the swamp, the apparatus. The name does not matter because the move is always the same move. It lost the first round to a printer, the one you already met. The woman who set the signers' names in lead when setting them was treason, and ran the sheets out the door faster than the fear could follow. That is the only way this cycle ever breaks. Not an army. A copy and another copy, and the truth moving faster than the men sent to burn it. There is one move the apparatus has never learned to counter, and it comes from the last place anyone looks, the very top. The machine can predict every man who climbs toward power. It has no model for the man who reaches the top and opens his hand, who takes the throne he was handed and sets the authority back into 1,000 hands instead, and walks away. It is done. The old line runs for you until you learn to do it for yourself. The names change every century. The move never does. The strongest hand in the room opening when every law of power says it should close, which is the exact opposite of the offer waiting on the other table. The road forks here, and you are standing on it. A free people is never conquered. It volunteers. One road, you remember what the thing was built to be. You stop waiting for an institution to save it, because the institutions are where the apparatus keeps its address now. You carry it yourself, the way the printer did, one copy and one square of ground and 1 yard at a time, until the authority settles back where it belongs, in 1,000 hands instead of one. That road is work. It is frightening. It comes with no guarantee, which is exactly what it came with on the first night too. The other road, you take the story they are already telling you. The Republic failed. The system is too far gone to save. There was never enough to go around, and there never will be. And freedom was always a luxury you could not really afford. And there is an arrangement waiting, a generous one. Food, shelter, the basics handled. Something coming in that you never had to earn. All it asks is the one thing you actually own. Glubb already named that stage. It was this one. The pioneer worn soft, trading the hard inheritance for room and board, and calling the trade progress. It arrives dressed as compassion, a safety net, a fair share at last, scaled now for a machinery that can hand it to everyone at once and watch to see who says no. The apparatus is betting on the second road. It has run this play on every free people for 3,000 years and never once lost the long game. It is betting the memory has worn down to nothing. The 250 years was enough. The audit is whether the bet pays. I do not know how it comes out. No one does. That is what makes it an audit and not a parade. You did not burn it down. You live in the most heavily armed nation that has ever existed. More guns than citizens, with more provocation than any generation in living memory. And you mostly went to work, raised your kids, and were kind to the person in front of you. You kept the lights on in a country whose loudest voices told you it deserved the dark. Whatever the screens say about how dangerous your kind are, the record says the reverse, and it is not close. Restraint on that scale is not weakness. It is the rarest political act there is, and it does not get settled in a chamber or a court or a vote, because all three already answer to the thing you would be voting against. It gets settled smaller than that. Closer in. It gets settled the way the printers settled it, one person at a time, deciding the thing they were handed matters more than the fear. It gets settled where the country was settled in the first place, before there was an army or a flag or a single law on the books. Inside a prayer. The country was born inside a prayer. Before there was a flag, or an army, or a single law on the books, there was a room of frightened men who had just agreed to commit treason together, and the first thing they did was stop and pray. Not as a ceremony, as men who knew the size of what they were touching and knew they could not carry it alone. Everything that came after, the document, the war, the marble, the 250 years grew up out of that one act of a people, going quiet before they built. A thing with a prayer at its root cannot be audited in a courtroom. It has to be settled in the same place it started. You already know the asking kind. Give me this, fix that, win this, spare them. There is nothing wrong with it. But it is not the prayer the audit turns on. There is an older one underneath it, and it asks for nothing at all. It is the prayer of going quiet enough to listen, not quiet enough to hear a voice out of the sky, quiet enough to reach the one thing in you that no one above you ever put there, and so no one above you can reach in and take back. In the design, it was a cold political claim, the architecture of it. The person is sovereign because of what is in him, so build the walls and guard it. Here it stops being a claim. Here it is a place, And you can actually go there, and you have been there before without anyone telling you what it was. You have been to that place. You did not get there by being told, and you will not get back by being told. The second prayer is only the practice of going to it on purpose in the daylight before the next loss makes you, and standing on it until you remember it is there. The men who built the country did not write the Father into the founding because they wanted a state religion. They had just escaped one. They wrote him in, and then they raised walls to keep every church and every office out of the path between him and you, because they understood that the one thing the whole design protects is that line. The direct one, the unbrokered one. They could not give you the floor. No one can give it to you, because it is already yours. What they could do, and did, was refuse to let anyone stand in the doorway and charge you a toll to reach it. That open doorway is the country's actual gift, not the freedom to do as you please. The freedom to go alone and unbrokered, to the one ground no power was ever allowed to tax. The audit does not get settled in a chamber or a court or a vote. All three already answer to the thing the vote would be against. A country in covenant does not get rededicated by its capital. It gets rededicated one person at a time, in the quiet, where a single soul reaches the floor in the dark and decides again that what is down there is not for sale and not for surrender. The keys do not go back to the watchers as long as enough ordinary people can still find that ground in themselves and refuse to hand it over. That is the whole audit. Run 100 million times, in 100 million rooms, no camera will ever enter. The country has stood at this exact place before, at the bottom of its worst years, and what turned it was never a policy. It was a generation of ordinary people quietly deciding, one at a time, that the thing in them was still worth the wait. That is the only engine that has ever turned it. It is the engine again now, which means the most political act available to you this year does not look political at all. It looks like a person sitting alone in a kitchen before the house wakes, growing quiet, refusing the oldest lie there is, that there is nothing in him the machine cannot reach. The watchers can manage almost everything about a life. They can price your work and rent your attention and decide most of what you are afraid of. They can send a survey home in your kid's backpack before anyone sends home a report card. The one thing they have never once managed is the person who has been to the floor and knows the way back, because he is the only thing the apparatus cannot convince. But the floor is not a place you go to hide. It is a place you go to be sent back up. A person who has stood on it does not stay down there in the quiet. He gets up and he goes and finds something to do with his hands. That is the next thing. The prayer is the inside of it. The hands are the outside. So you get up off the floor and you go find something to fix. That is the whole motion of a life that has been to the quiet and come back. It does not stay down there. It rises and it reaches for something real, because the thing you touched in the dark turns out to want a body in the daylight. It wants to be made into something, a repaired engine, a framed wall, a meal cooked for people you love, a seam welded shut that will carry a load for 40 years after you're gone. The age you came up in told you the real work was managing symbols, moving money that was never there, arranging words about things instead of touching the things themselves, it was lying to you, and some part of you always knew, because your hands were bored, and your soul was tired in a way no amount of rest ever fixed. The rebuilding never happens in the capital. Look at where it is already happening, and it is nowhere near a marble building or a chamber of any kind. It is in driveways. It is in garages, with the door rolled up and a light burning past dark. It is in shops that smell of cut metal and sawdust, where one person is making or fixing one real thing, and then the next one. And the country comes back exactly that fast, and no faster, one fixed thing at a time. There is no shortcut, and there was never meant to be. A republic is not a wave you ride. It is a barn you raise, board by board, with the people who live near you, most of whom you will never agree with about anything except that the barn should stand. The deepest rebuilding wears a disguise. It looks like a man in a garage with his son, teaching him to weld. The boy is small for it. The mask is too big for his face, and he holds it on with one hand. The father stands behind him, his hands over the boy's hands, and tells him the thing his own father told him, that you do not stare into the brightness. You watch the edge of the puddle. You go slow. You let the two pieces become one piece. The arc lights up and throws their two shadows huge on the back wall. And for 1 second, the whole thing is right there in that light. The seam. The hands inside the hands. The instruction running down a line older than either of them. The boy lifts the mask and looks at the bead he ran, crooked and proud, and the father tells him it will hold, and it will. A skill crossing from a hand that has it into a hand that does not have it yet, in a garage, on an ordinary evening, buried so far under the deck that neither of them would ever once call it anything. The next 250 years are not going to be decided in the capital. They are going to be decided in 10,000 garages and 10,000 kitchens in the unglamorous handing of the real things from one generation to the next. How to fix it. How to grow it. How to stand at a bench until the hard part comes easy. How to tell the truth. Take the hit. And not pass the cost down to someone smaller. None of that gets legislated. All of it gets taught, hand to hand, at home, by people no camera will ever find. And the sum of all of it, quietly, is whether the Republic has a generation to hand itself to or not. The garage door rolls up and the street is already loud. The Republic has a sound, and it is not a speech. It is a block on the 3rd of July with the grills going. The neighbor 2 houses down burns the first round of dogs, and his wife announces it to the street. A sprinkler catches a kid at full run, and the kid goes down laughing. A dog collects a hamburger nobody agreed to give him. The men stand in the smoke arguing about a fence line and a carburetor, and whether the finale will be any good this year. And when it comes up short, the whole street groans at the same sky in the same second, and then cheers louder than it groaned. Nobody organized that. Nobody voted on it. 100 people who do not agree about God or the news or the vote just flinched at the same sky, and that flinch is the whole document. The consent of the governed gets renewed right there, in the smoke, with the ash falling in somebody's beer. The scarcity light cannot survive a street like that. Nobody counting the hot dogs. Enough and loud, and nobody underneath. You have a version of this within reach, not a grand one, A small, specific, real one. The thing in your own house or on your own street that is broken and that you already know how to fix or could learn by autumn. The kid near you who has nobody teaching him anything with his hands. The skill in you that you let go quiet because the age said it did not matter. The country does not need you to save it. It has never once been saved that way. It needs you to pick up the one real thing in front of you and do it well and teach one person younger than you to do the same. That is not a metaphor, and it is not too small. It is the exact size the rebuilding has always been. He builds because the thing should exist, because his kids will use it, because a true seam run in a dark garage is work nobody ordered, done well by a man who could have phoned it in and did not. And all of it, the design and the clock and the audit and the prayer and the hands, comes down in the end to one person. One person in one yard, on one ordinary evening, holding the whole inheritance in his hand and not even knowing that is what he is holding. That is the last thing. The man came to the fence the night before the 4th, and afterward he could never say for certain that he had been there at all. He was on the back step with a beer in his hand. His daughter was in the yard with a bucket. She was 4. She filled the bucket at the hose and carried it across the grass with both hands and poured it on a bare patch where the lawn had died and went back and filled it again. She had been at it an hour. The dirt took the water and stayed dirt. She did not stop. He had not moved in that hour. The beer had gone warm in his hand and he had not drunk it. The dogs 2 streets over started up. Then they quit. There was a man at the fence. He stood past the reach of the porch light, where the yard went dark. Old. Still. No dog. No errand. He was watching the girl. The father set the beer down on the step. Help you with something? No. The old man did not look over. Came a long way to watch her not quit is all. Long way from where? From where this goes. He tipped his head at the dark past the houses at nothing a man could see. You felt it this year. Like the floor went out from under the whole thing and then it came back. The father did not answer. He stayed on the step where the kid was 3 steps away. It went out from under most of them, the old man said. Flat. A man reporting weather. Not many of these roads come out anywhere you'd set a child down. I've walked back along a lot of them. They all run through one yard, one evening. One man holding the whole thing in his hands for a minute and never knowing it. Holding what? Out in the yard, the girl tipped the bucket and watched the water go. There's a thing in her, the old man said. You had it too. It's down under you now, under 40 years of being talked out of it. The world does that. Slow, not cruel. It's just what the years are. One morning she'll be grown and reach for it and not find it, and go looking in the places that sell it back to you, and none of them will have it. He said it without heat. It was hers. Nobody gets a hand on that one. Not me, not the year out there turning its number, nobody. It's the only thing she'll ever own clean. And you came to tell me that. I came to see if she still had it. The old man watched her fill the bucket. She's 4. She still knows she isn't from here. You can't stop the rest. It comes for everybody. Then what's the use? She has it tonight. And you're one breath from putting it out. The father was already up off the step. He had not decided to be. He was going to cross the yard and take the kid by the shoulders and tell her something. Something big. Something she could hold against all of it. There, the old man said. That's how it goes out, every time. A man feels it and he grabs. The father stood there half up. You can't hand it to her, the old man said. You can't add to it and you can't guard it, and the harder you grab, the faster it's gone. The only thing you get is to not stand on it. Give her a speech. Tell her she's chosen. Tell her the world's dark and she's the light. All of it is standing on it. She's 4. She needs a man who will watch her pour water on dead dirt for an hour and not once tell her to quit. That was always the whole job. The size of it is the part you put on yourself. The father sat back down. The girl set the bucket down. She walked halfway across the yard and stopped and looked straight at the fence, into the dark, where her father would swear afterward there had been nothing to see. She did not wave. She was not afraid. Her head went over a little to one side. Then she turned and went back to the hose. The old man did not move for a while. She still knows me, he said. That's all I came for. Who are you? The father turned to ask it. Where'd you come from? Be not afraid of it. The old man was watching the girl, not him. That's the only thing worth the walk. There's nothing in the dark to be scared of. Oh, there never was. Scared is how a man forgets. Nobody ever talked a man out of what was his while he wasn't afraid. The father turned back to the fence to answer. There was no one there. The yard ran down to dark and then to nothing. The fence was a fence. A dog barked 2 streets over and quit. The girl was filling the bucket. He sat a while with his heart going and told himself a tired man at the end of a long year sees things at the edge of a yard. He did not believe it. He could never afterwards say which part he did not believe. Push me, she said. She had given up on the grass. She was on the swing now, the old kind, 2 chains and a board, kicking at the air and getting nowhere and not minding it, the same as the bucket. He came down off the step. His knees told him about it. He crossed the yard to where the man had stood. No one. The fence was a fence. He put his hand flat on her back, the whole of it under his palm, and pushed. She went up into the last of the dark and came down to his hand, up and down. He had come down to tell her something. He stood there with his hand on her, and did not. The sky over the houses went from black to gray, and at the far edge it was going gold. Out past the fence, the country was turning some number. A big one, the kind they put on banners. He had spent the whole year with his ear cocked toward it, and from here, with his hand on her back, he could not hear it at all. It was a small sound. It had always been a small sound. The big thing was the one going up into the gray and coming back to his hand. 4 years old, getting nowhere, laughing now. He kept his hand on the kid and his mouth shut and pushed her up into the light that was already coming. The speeches this weekend will tell you it is the greatest country on earth. They are right, and they will not tell you why. I spent this whole year on one question. What was this country actually built to be? And what older and larger thing were the men who built it reaching for when they did it? The architecture you just walked is the closest I could get to the answer. The floor underneath all of it is the closest I could get to handing you back a thing you already owned. I I gathered it for the 250th. It is yours. It was never priced and never put behind a wall, and it never will be. You know the one thing to carry by now. The floor under the lost that the lost could not get below. The ground in you that no power above you ever put there, and none has ever once been able to reach. The audit comes down to whether enough ordinary people can still find that ground in themselves and refuse to hand it over. You can. You always could. Be not afraid of the dark stretch. Happy 250th. The grandchildren are counting on this generation.